black smoke of little ships, where once hung the pall of a burning town. Dunkirk in 1950. Rusting iron and rotting hulks, sole relics of a great deliverance. Now, 10 years after, the little ships were back, and in Dunkirk, men stood and remembered. They stood at Dunkirk, and they stood too at St. Valory, for it was in such tiny places that all was lost, yet all was won. There men fought so that others might return, to Remembrance and Lyon-sur-Mer, to the meadows of Normandy. In 1950, the arenas of war were but quiet beaches, cliffs and fields, but fields in which white crosses made a permanent harvest. And in 1950, the Allies still patrolled Berlin, that shattered city of weedy ruins and broken dreams of conquest. There, the victors watched over the vanquished, and there they watched each other. In Berlin, too, men remembered and paid homage to sacrifices made in a common cause. Yet here, the ex-Allies were separated, not just by frontier lines, but by vast differences of political creed. Though in Berlin they stood side by side, close enough to touch, yet they were divided by a broad and slowly widening gulf. Once along the flat roads of northern France rolled the steel tracks of the German panzers. And at their coming, the people gazed in wonderment and awe. Now, 10 years after, they stood again to marvel at the new machines of peace. The world's largest mechanical press, rolling from the foundries of Chicago, Illinois, to the foundries of Douai, France, to rebuild the old world with the power of the new. In Washington, after 2 years of the Marshall Plan, the man who gave it its name reported on its progress, George C. Marshall.
It is true that Western Europe, to get its economic house in such order that it can survive and prosper in this competitive modern world, requires a tremendous final effort over the next 2 years. But looking again at the conditions prevalent in the spring of 1947, I can only feel that one near miracle has been accomplished. We must work for and expect another miracle.
To the peoples of Europe living close to the grim problems of recovery, the near miracle of the past 2 years was not so apparent. And yet, in their cities, there were marked signs of steady progress. Rationing was fast disappearing, and with it, the black market. More food was on display than for many a long year. Textiles and clothing, though still expensive, were nevertheless abundant. But when things go right, few ask questions. To the people of Western Europe, the means of recovery was so familiar as to exist almost unnoticed. To habitual travelers on the airlines of Europe, an accustomed figure was America's Paul Hoffman, responsible to Congress for the smooth working of the European Recovery Program. Now, almost as familiar to Parisians as their Place de la Concorde, were the headquarters of O.E.E.C, the Organization for European Economic Cooperation. Here the representatives of 18 nations met to decide where and how American aid could best be applied to restore and consolidate Europe's productive capacity. In the vast workshop of Europe, production figures were climbing. Output was greater than at any time since before the war. Steadily, the dollar gaps were closing. Yet still, the continent could not produce enough to pay for the food and raw materials vital to its existence and prosperity. For 18 nations, Marshall aid dollars continued to fill the gap, enabling Holland to import 3/4 of the cotton she needed to keep Dutch textile looms at full capacity, bringing to Britain her entire import of carbon black, necessary for the production of rubber for her industries and transport, providing France with the sulfur she needed to make fertilizers to protect her millions of acres of vineyards. Through Marshall aid came tractors and farming equipment for Turkey to turn a primitive agricultural system into a prime food producer for the whole continent. With American dollars came American steel for the merchant ships building in the shipyards of Trieste, high-grade feeds for the cattle on Danish farms, and out in the North Sea, special depth recording gear to help Danish fishermen locate the deep shoals of herring. 300 miles north of the Arctic Circle, machinery from America was digging out the rich iron ore vital to Norway and all Western Europe. In 18 countries, American aid was playing an all-important part. But though the finance and materials for recovery came from abroad, much was due to the efforts of Western Europe's 270 million people. In the factories and workshops, men and women were fast learning that in the peace, just as in the war, output was vital to survival, that ultimate success was dependent upon their own efforts. So at their looms and benches they worked hard, spurred by the knowledge that this time they were making not tanks, bombers, and weapons of destruction, but clothes, cars, tractors, and machines with which to build. Outside on Europe's farmlands, land workers too kept up the pressure, realizing that their harvests were to feed not fighting armies, but hungry, needy peoples. So in the docks of London, Antwerp, Havre, and Rotterdam, the noise of the busy cranes grew and swelled. In Europe, the healthy roar of new trade was an echo to the efforts of its people.